Carrera Panamericana, they start you by class. So on the first day, the fast cars leave first, and then it works its way down to the smaller classes. Every morning, they'd see me, I'd be a little further up the field, a little further up the field. And the Mexican said, that car, it's like a blue ghost. Every morning, it's further up the field. And how do you do that, they asked. And I said, well, I'm very consistent. I've been in love with cars since I was a little kid. When I was 8 years old, my Honda bought me a little Honda Trail 50. One of my neighbors had an Alfa Romeo GTV, and he had a CZ dirt bike, so he showed up one day and he took me out to Indian Dunes, and I watched him race, and then from there my passion for racing grew up. Living and growing up in Hollywood, I saw a lot of really nice cars. I lived up the street from Charles Schultz, did the Peanut Strip, and he had a bunch of Ferraris, and I loved the sound of them, I loved the looks of them. I always wanted to be a racing car driver. I was able to make my dream come true when I bought this car and built it for the Carrera Panamericana. Pero mi coche está muy rápido. Beep, beep. My name is Christian Drew Sidaris. I'm a filmmaker and a racing driver. And this is my car. It's a 53 Chevrolet 210. Childhood friend of mine, Chris Gamish, found this car back in Los Angeles in 1986. And so when Chris found this car, we got together and decided to build it for the Carrera Panamericana for the '89 race. And we took it down to Mexico to Ed Everett down in Baja, California. And he just restored it and put a roll bar in it, rebuilt the engine and the suspension and put a 4-point bar in it, and we put the harnesses in it. And back then, that's all you really needed. When we did it, it was a lot like the original race. Matter of fact, it was exactly like the original race. There were only vintage cars in the race. There were no modern cars. Now the cars are very much similar to a NASCAR with all the safety features and full cages and fire systems. This car has done 4 Carrera Panamericanas. I drove it in '89, '90, and '91, and then I had the opportunity to co-drive a Corvette for Ron Duplessis, replica of a 53 vet, and I let a Belgian named Paul Verreken drive it. He'd run a fin-tailed Mercedes in the Rome-Liège-Rome race, so I figured, well, heck, he must be qualified if he'd survived that several times. So from there, he did pretty good in it. He really enjoyed it, and we keep in touch. And someday I'd like to go to Europe and run some of those rallies there. I'd, of course, love to do the Mille Miglia. I think the only American car that ran the Mille was a 57 Thunderbird, but I think pretty much the rest of them were European cars. And you know, European cars really are open road cars. I think Europeans find American cars to be quite vanilla. And one of the things I noticed when I was a young man was a lot of people would buy European cars and they wouldn't properly maintain them, because American cars you really didn't have to maintain that well. You just put gas and oil in them and they ran. Whereas if you had a car that needed the carburetor synchronized or things looked after, they just weren't really into it. So that's why you find a lot of old European cars with very low mileage in barns, because they just didn't take care of them and they broke down and they didn't want to bother fixing them because it's cheaper to replace them. So this was my daily driver for 7 years. It runs, hopefully it'll be running long after I'm gone. You know, I'm just a caretaker of it. I hope the next person that gets it, hopefully someone in my family, you know, enjoys it as much as I did, and that they pass it on to their kids. I'd like to keep it in the family. Well, one of the more interesting experiences I had is in the first race, the car was original, had the drum brakes, and we're coming down through the mountains, and the brakes were getting a little dodgy, they were getting overheated. And I came through a cut in a mountain, and I looked up, and there's about 200 Mexicans standing there. And I wondered why they were there, and I looked back down at the road, and there was a bunch of gravel and dirt. I wasn't going to make that turn. I went flying off that cliff, and when I landed, I realized that I had gone further than the other 4 cars that had done the same thing, and that there were a bunch of photographers there and stuff. So I think it was kind of a prank they were pulling on us to see if they could catch us unawares, and they did. I shouldn't have looked up. I should have kept my eyes on the road. So after the first race, I'd moved to Shreveport, Louisiana. And while I was there, I met some fellows that owned a racetrack there. And at the racetrack, there was a Viper race cars that was owned by a fellow named Ronnie Adams. He built race cars, and he took a liking to me. So he took this car and he clipped it. He put a Nova clip on it. And then we put a larger 6-cylinder in it. We put a 292 straight 6 in it with power brakes and power steering. And then we modified it to have a full cage in it. You know, originally in the first race, maybe it would go 80 miles an hour, and now it's good for about 130. The original Pan American races were a point-to-point high-speed race. You needed to get to certain places at certain times, so basically you had to survive the day and get to the end of the day. And you did get penalized for driving too fast in certain areas, which is only right. But once we got into the transits out in the country, you had to go pretty fast to get far enough ahead to service the vehicle and get fuel. The first few of the reenactment races were pretty much off the hood. So they made it a little more stringent in the later races and made more checkpoints, made you stay more to the certain schedule. But I understand now they have the car speed limit to 144. But there's a lot of side roads and a lot of donkeys that don't read real good. So you gotta always be careful. You don't want to hit somebody's donkey. you'd come into these small towns and there'd be 5,000–10,000 people waiting for you. And it was a lot like the rallies where they're trying to touch your car. I had my heart up in my throat so many times. You know, you're going 70 miles an hour and they're parting like the ocean. You know, it's pretty scary. You really wish they wouldn't do that. So yeah, when Chris and I got the car, it was already blue and white. And I realized that blue and white were the American racing colors. Because, you know, in the old days, the British were green, the Italians were red, Germans were white or silver. We kept it this color. I painted a little brighter blue because I'm Greek and it makes it look a little more like the Greek colors, and I'm proud to be Greek. At one point, I was actually trying to race as a Greek because there's so many Americans racing and so few Greeks. You know, I thought it might be fun. In the first race, they had the 250 cubic inch straight sixes because the rules stated that you had to have a similar type engine, but it could be a later model for reliability. So I decided to go with the biggest engine, a 5-liter straight six out of a school bus. And behind that, we put a 4-speed wide ratio Muncie transmission. And then we put a Nova rear end behind that with a 273 rear gear, which is a very tall rear gear. It's for top speed. So between the good 4-speed gearbox, the very powerful 6-cylinder engine, the car went from being an 80-mile-an-hour car to being a 130-mile-an-hour car. When I moved back here to Morro Bay about 9 years ago, I found that there's quite a few local hot rods and vintage car guys. They started hanging out down here at the Stacks every Saturday, and we do car shows together. And we try to do charity things like Toys for Tots runs and anything, you know, if there's a charity event and they need some cars there, you know, we usually gather up 15 or 20 of them and head over there and just help out. Several of the car shows here, you know, most of them are for charities. The one in Cambria, the Lions Club, it's all for education. It's all for swim teams or school-related things. So, you know, it's always great to participate in that kind of thing. It's amazing how many people recognize the car for being from the Pan American, or how many people just think, lucky I was at the circus when the clown died, and I got the big clown car now. And the reason you do this race is because it is a challenge. It's an opportunity that you only have once in a lifetime. There's no huge reward other than the lifetimes of a memory. You got to do things that you're proud of when you're young, because when you're old, that's all you're going to have to look back on. And when you've done things like this that are just so amazing and so wonderful, and I enjoyed every mile of it, and I put in 8,000 miles down there of racing. Wouldn't trade that for anything in the world.